March 15, 2023, Maple Grove, Minnesota. On a quiet suburban street in Maple Grove, Minnesota, where manicured lawns stretched endlessly and children's bicycles dotted the sidewalks, Michelle Anderson thought she knew everything about her neighborhood. The 34-year-old registered nurse had lived at 1247 Oakwood Drive for 6 years, establishing herself as a pillar of the community. She organized block parties, coordinated neighborhood watch meetings, and maintained the kind of friendly relationships that made suburban life feel safe and predictable. 3 houses down from Michelle's modest 2-story home lived Robert Chen, a man who seemed to embody everything positive about American suburban life. At 42 years old, Robert owned Chen's Landscaping Solutions, a thriving business that had transformed countless yards throughout the Twin Cities metropolitan area. His own property served as a living advertisement for his work. Pristine flower beds, perfectly trimmed hedges, and a lawn so immaculate it appeared professionally maintained daily. So glad to have you here. Comment your city so I can bring cases from your region and also know where you're watching me from. Robert's reputation in the neighborhood was spotless. He volunteered to shovel elderly neighbors' driveways during Minnesota's brutal winters, offered free landscaping advice to anyone who asked, and never failed to wave cheerfully during his morning jogs. His landscaping truck, a white Ford F-250 with his company logo emblazoned on the sides, was a familiar sight on Oakwood Drive, usually departing before dawn and returning well after sunset. The first indication that something might be amiss came during the second week of March 2023. Michelle had been working the night shift at Hennepin County Medical Center, a rotation that left her sleep schedule completely reversed. Arriving home at 7:30 a.m. after a particularly demanding shift in the cardiac care unit, she noticed unusual activity at Robert's residence. His garage door, which typically remained closed throughout the day, was partially open, revealing glimpses of what appeared to be industrial equipment that seemed out of place for a landscaping business. Over the following nights, Michelle's observations became more detailed and increasingly concerning. The sounds emanating from Robert's garage didn't match the typical noise patterns of landscaping equipment maintenance. Instead of the familiar hum of lawnmower engines or the clatter of gardening tools, she heard mechanical sounds that suggested precision equipment, accompanied by periodic ventilation fan operation that seemed to run throughout the night. The lighting patterns from Robert's garage also struck Michelle as odd. Rather than the steady illumination one might expect from someone performing routine equipment maintenance, the lights flickered on and off in irregular intervals, sometimes accompanied by brief flashes of unusually bright, almost blue-white light that seemed inconsistent with standard garage lighting. Michelle's nursing background had taught her to notice details that others might overlook, and her instincts told her that Robert's nocturnal activities warranted closer attention. She began documenting these observations in a small notebook, recording times, duration of activities, and specific details about the sounds and lighting patterns she witnessed. On the night of March 14th, Michelle's curiosity reached a tipping point. After returning from her shift at the hospital, she noticed that Robert's garage was not only fully open, but brightly illuminated with what appeared to be multiple high-intensity work lights. The sound of machinery was more pronounced than usual, accompanied by what sounded like the operation of heavy-duty ventilation equipment. Positioned at her kitchen window, which offered a partial view of Robert's garage, Michelle used a pair of binoculars she typically reserved for birdwatching to get a clearer look at the activity. What she observed defied her expectations and sent a chill through her entire body. Rather than landscaping equipment, Robert's garage appeared to contain large, stainless steel containers, complex piping systems, and what looked like industrial-grade chemical processing equipment. The most disturbing aspect of Michelle's observation was Robert himself. The man she had known as a friendly, helpful neighbor was working methodically with equipment that bore no resemblance to anything related to landscaping. He wore protective gear, including a full-face respirator and heavy rubber gloves, moving with the precision of someone well-versed in handling dangerous materials. As Michelle watched, Robert lifted what appeared to be a heavy plastic container and poured its contents into one of the stainless steel tanks. The liquid created a visible reaction, producing steam or vapor that was immediately captured by the ventilation system. The entire process was conducted with a level of care and precision that suggested this was neither the first time Robert had performed these actions nor a simple equipment cleaning procedure. The realization that her trusted neighbor might be involved in activities far removed from landscaping sent Michelle into a state of shock. She had trusted this man, had recommended his services to friends, and had never questioned the legitimacy of his business operations. The equipment she observed suggested chemical processing capabilities that raised serious questions about what exactly Robert Chen was doing in his garage during the nighttime hours. Michelle's medical training kicked in as she tried to process what she had witnessed. The protective equipment Robert wore suggested he was handling hazardous materials, while the sophisticated nature of his setup indicated this was not an amateur operation. The ventilation system alone represented a significant investment and suggested that whatever processes were taking place required careful management of potentially dangerous fumes or vapors. As dawn approached on March 15th, Michelle watched Robert carefully clean and store his equipment with methodical precision. Every surface was wiped down, every container was secured, and the entire garage was returned to an appearance of normalcy. By the time Robert finally closed his garage door and headed into his house, there was no visible evidence of the night's activities. Michelle retreated from her window, her mind racing with questions and concerns. The man she had considered a model neighbor had revealed a hidden side that challenged everything she thought she knew about him. The sophisticated equipment, the protective gear, and the secretive nature of his activities all pointed to something far more complex and potentially dangerous than a simple landscaping business. As she tried to process the implications of what she had witnessed, Michelle realized that she was now privy to information that could have serious consequences. The question that haunted her as she attempted to get some sleep was whether she had stumbled upon illegal activities that posed a threat to her community, or if there was some legitimate explanation for Robert's mysterious nocturnal operations. But deep in her heart, Michelle Anderson knew that what she had witnessed was just the beginning of a much darker story that was about to unfold. March 16, 2023, Maple Grove Police Department. The sleepless hours that followed Michelle Anderson's shocking discovery left her grappling with a decision that would change everything. After spending the entire day replaying the events in her mind, she realized that her nursing oath to protect and serve extended beyond the hospital walls. By 3 p.m. on March 16th, Michelle found herself sitting across from Detective James Morrison at the Maple Grove Police Department, her detailed notebook open between them. Detective Morrison, a 15-year veteran of the force with experience in organized crime investigations, initially approached Michelle's report with professional skepticism. Neighbor disputes and misunderstandings were common, and accusations based on nocturnal observations often proved to be misinterpretations of innocent activities. However, Michelle's medical background and the methodical nature of her documentation quickly changed his perspective. The notebook Michelle presented contained 3 weeks of observations, complete with timestamps, weather conditions, and detailed descriptions of sounds, lighting patterns, and activities. Her nursing training was evident in the precision of her record-keeping, treating each observation like a patient chart entry. The consistency of the patterns she documented, combined with her professional credibility, convinced Detective Morrison that her concerns warranted serious investigation. Morrison's initial research into Robert Chen revealed several interesting discrepancies that supported Michelle's suspicions. While Chen's Landscaping Solutions was properly licensed and maintained an excellent reputation with the Better Business Bureau, the business registration contained gaps that raised questions. The company had been established 5 years earlier, but Robert Chen's previous work history before starting the business was notably sparse, with employment records that seemed incomplete for someone of his apparent expertise and financial success. The detective's inquiry into Robert's residential history revealed additional inconsistencies. Property records showed that Robert had purchased his Oakwood Drive home with a substantial cash payment, unusual for someone who had recently started a landscaping business. His previous addresses showed a pattern of short-term residences in different states, never staying in one location for more than 2 years until settling in Maple Grove. Detective Morrison expanded his investigation by conducting discreet inquiries with other neighbors on Oakwood Drive. What emerged from these conversations was a pattern of observations that, when viewed collectively, painted a troubling picture of Robert Chen's activities. Several residents reported unusual chemical odors emanating from his property, particularly during nighttime hours, describing smells that ranged from metallic to acrid, none of which were consistent with typical landscaping activities. Patricia Williams, an elderly neighbor who lived directly across from Robert, revealed that she had noticed frequent deliveries to his home during unusual hours. These deliveries often occurred between midnight and 4 a.m., involving unmarked vehicles and individuals who appeared to be making quick exchanges with Robert before departing immediately. The secretive nature of these interactions had made Patricia uncomfortable, but she had hesitated to report them, assuming they were related to his landscaping business. Another neighbor, Timothy Rodriguez, who worked as a chemical engineer, provided perhaps the most concerning observation. During several evening walks, Timothy had noticed that the ventilation system on Robert's garage operated continuously during nighttime hours, something that seemed excessive for equipment storage or maintenance. As someone familiar with industrial ventilation requirements, Timothy recognized that such systems were typically necessary only when dealing with hazardous materials or processes that generated dangerous fumes. Detective Morrison's investigation took a more serious turn when he contacted the Minnesota Department of Health to inquire about permits for chemical handling or storage in residential areas. The search revealed that Robert Chen had never applied for any permits related to chemical storage, processing, or disposal, despite the apparent sophistication of his garage setup, as described by Michelle and other neighbors. The detective's research into Chen's landscaping solutions revealed another troubling discrepancy. While the business maintained contracts with numerous residential and commercial clients throughout the Twin Cities area, an analysis of the company's stated revenue versus the apparent scale of operations suggested income sources that extended beyond standard landscaping services. The business bank accounts showed regular deposits that seemed disproportionate to the documented landscaping contracts, indicating possible unreported income streams. Morrison's investigation expanded to include a review of missing persons reports and unsolved cases in the Twin Cities metropolitan area over the past 5 years, coinciding with Robert's establishment of his business and residence in Maple Grove. While no direct connections emerged immediately, the detective noted several cases involving individuals with connections to organized crime activities who had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind evidence that suggested professional elimination rather than voluntary disappearance. The most alarming discovery came when Detective Morrison contacted the Environmental Protection Agency regarding illegal chemical disposal in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. EPA records revealed several instances of illegal dumping involving sophisticated chemical processing, including cases where evidence suggested that organic materials had been dissolved using industrial-grade acids and bases. The locations of these dumping sites formed a geographic pattern that centered around the Twin Cities area, with several incidents occurring in proximity to areas where Robert's landscaping business had documented contracts. As Detective Morrison compiled his findings, a disturbing picture began to emerge. Robert Chen appeared to be operating a sophisticated chemical processing facility under the guise of a legitimate landscaping business. The equipment Michelle had observed, combined with the pattern of secretive deliveries, unexplained income, and possible connections to unsolved disappearances, suggested that Robert's garage might be serving a far more sinister purpose than anyone in the neighborhood had imagined. The detective's research into similar operations in other jurisdictions revealed a growing trend of criminals using residential properties to establish chemical processing facilities for illegal purposes. These operations often involved the dissolution of evidence from violent crimes, the processing of illegal drugs, or the disposal of materials that criminal organizations needed to eliminate without a trace. Morrison realized that Michelle Anderson's observations had potentially uncovered a criminal operation with implications that extended far beyond Maple Grove. The sophistication of the equipment, the pattern of secretive activities, and the possible connections to organized crime suggested that Robert Chen might be providing specialized services to criminal organizations throughout the region. As the detective prepared to escalate his investigation to include federal agencies, he became increasingly aware that the friendly neighborhood landscaper that residents of Oakwood Drive had trusted for years might actually be operating one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in Minnesota history. The question that now haunted Detective Morrison was not whether Robert Chen was involved in illegal activities, but rather how many crimes his mysterious garage operations had helped to conceal, and how many victims' families had been denied justice because of the services he appeared to provide. As evening approached on March 16th, Detective Morrison knew that Michelle Anderson's courage in reporting her observations had opened a door to a criminal world that none of them had imagined could exist in their peaceful suburban community. March 20th, 2023, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Field Office, Minneapolis. The investigation that began with Michelle Anderson's careful observations had evolved into a multi-agency operation involving the FBI, DEA, and Minnesota State Police. Detective Morrison's findings had triggered federal interest when database searches revealed that Robert Chen's fingerprints matched those of David Thompson, a former industrial chemist who had disappeared from authorities in Nevada 3 years earlier after being investigated for illegal chemical disposal operations. The revelation of Robert's true identity sent shockwaves through the investigative team. David Thompson had been wanted in connection with a sophisticated criminal network that provided evidence elimination services to organized crime groups across the western United States. His background as a licensed chemical engineer made him uniquely qualified to operate the type of facility that Michelle had observed in his garage. FBI Special Agent Sarah Martinez, who had been tracking Thompson's activities for over 2 years, immediately recognized the significance of the Minnesota discovery. Thompson's previous operations in Nevada and California had involved the complete dissolution of evidence from high-profile criminal activities, making it nearly impossible for law enforcement to build cases against major criminal figures. His techniques were so effective that several murder investigations had collapsed due to the complete absence of physical evidence. The federal investigation revealed that Thompson's transformation into Robert Chen had been carefully orchestrated. The landscaping business served as a perfect cover for his real activities, providing legitimate reasons for chemical purchases, equipment acquisition, and unusual working hours. His clients in the landscaping business were genuine, creating a credible facade that had fooled neighbors, local authorities, and even financial institutions for 5 years. Analysis of Thompson's financial records revealed a sophisticated money laundering operation that channeled payments for his illegal services through the landscaping business. Deposits from legitimate landscaping contracts were mixed with much larger payments from shell companies and offshore accounts, creating a complex financial web that had successfully hidden millions of dollars in illegal income. The investigation team discovered that Thompson's operation in Maple Grove was significantly more advanced than his previous facilities. The equipment observed by Michelle represented a complete chemical processing laboratory, capable of dissolving organic and inorganic materials with virtually no trace. The ventilation system was connected to a complex filtration network that neutralized dangerous fumes and eliminated odors that might alert neighbors or authorities. Federal agents conducting surveillance of Thompson's property documented a pattern of activity that confirmed the scope of his operation. High-value vehicles with out-of-state license plates arrived at irregular intervals, typically during the early morning hours when neighborhood activity was minimal. These vehicles often carried individuals who appeared to be conducting business transactions with Thompson before departing quickly. Electronic surveillance revealed that Thompson maintained communications with criminal organizations across multiple states using encrypted messaging systems and secure phone networks. These communications referenced services that were clearly related to evidence elimination, including the disposal of materials that investigators believed were connected to violent crimes in cities throughout the Midwest. The FBI's investigation expanded to include Thompson's supply chain, revealing a network of chemical suppliers who had been unknowingly providing materials for his illegal operations. Purchase records showed regular acquisitions of industrial-grade acids, bases, and specialized equipment typically used in legitimate chemical processing industries, but adapted for Thompson's criminal purposes. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Thompson had been actively recruiting individuals with chemistry backgrounds to expand his operation. Intercepted communications revealed plans to establish additional facilities in other metropolitan areas, creating a franchise-like network of evidence elimination services that would serve criminal organizations nationwide. As federal agents prepared to execute search warrants on Thompson's property, they realized they were dealing with one of the most sophisticated criminal operations ever discovered in the upper Midwest. The combination of Thompson's technical expertise, his elaborate cover story, and his connections to major criminal organizations made him a significant threat to law enforcement efforts across multiple jurisdictions. The surveillance team reported that Thompson had become increasingly cautious in recent days, suggesting that he might be aware of the investigation. His normal patterns of activity had changed, with fewer nighttime operations and increased security measures around his property. Electronic monitoring revealed that he had begun encrypting communications that were previously sent in plain text, indicating a heightened awareness of potential law enforcement interest. On the evening of March 19th, surveillance cameras captured Thompson removing large containers from his garage and loading them into a rented truck. The urgency of his movements and the late hour of the activity suggested that he was attempting to relocate or destroy evidence before authorities could secure it. This development prompted federal agents to accelerate their timeline for executing search warrants. The investigation team faced a critical decision point as they watched Thompson's frantic efforts to clean his facility. They had gathered sufficient evidence to arrest him on multiple federal charges, but allowing him to continue his evidence destruction might eliminate crucial information about his criminal network and the crimes he had helped to conceal. Electronic intercepts revealed that Thompson had contacted several individuals using emergency communication protocols, suggesting that he was preparing to flee Minnesota. These communications referenced contingency plans that included document destruction, equipment disposal, and the activation of escape routes that had been established for exactly this type of scenario. As federal agents positioned themselves around Thompson's property in preparation for a coordinated raid, they knew they were about to confront a criminal whose activities had protected some of the most dangerous individuals in organized crime. The sophisticated operation that Michelle Anderson had inadvertently discovered represented years of planning and millions of dollars in criminal proceeds. The investigation had revealed that Thompson's garage contained not just equipment for evidence elimination, but also detailed records of his criminal activities, including documentation of services provided to major crime figures across the country. These records could potentially break open dozens of unsolved cases and expose criminal networks that had operated with impunity for years. As dawn approached on March 20th, federal agents prepared to execute what would become one of the most significant organized crime raids in Minnesota history. The quiet suburban neighborhood where Michelle Anderson had noticed unusual activity was about to become the center of a law enforcement operation that would expose a criminal enterprise beyond anything the residents of Oakwood Drive could have imagined. But Thompson's awareness of the investigation meant that the raid would not be the straightforward operation that agents had hoped for, and what they would discover in his garage would reveal crimes far more extensive and disturbing than even the federal task force had anticipated. March 21st, 2023, 5:47 a.m., Oakwood Drive, Maple Grove. The pre-dawn raid on David Thompson's residence unfolded with military precision as federal agents surrounded the property under cover of darkness. The operation involved over 30 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies, each trained in handling hazardous materials and evidence recovery in potentially dangerous chemical environments. The quiet suburban street that had been Michelle Anderson's peaceful home for 6 years was about to witness one of the most significant criminal discoveries in Minnesota's history. Thompson's attempt to destroy evidence had been partially successful, but investigators quickly realized that his operation was far too extensive to be completely eliminated in a single night. The garage that Michelle had observed contained a sophisticated laboratory that represented years of development and millions of dollars in specialized equipment. Federal agents wearing full hazmat suits entered the facility to find active chemical processes still running, suggesting that Thompson had been forced to abandon his destruction efforts when he realized the investigation was imminent. The scale of Thompson's operation exceeded even the FBI's most pessimistic estimates. The garage laboratory contained multiple industrial-grade dissolution tanks, each capable of completely eliminating organic materials within hours. The chemical processes involved were so advanced that they left virtually no trace evidence, explaining why numerous criminal investigations had failed to produce the physical evidence necessary for successful prosecutions. Agent Martinez, leading the evidence recovery team, discovered that Thompson had maintained meticulous records of his criminal activities. Hidden behind a false wall in the garage was a fireproof safe containing detailed documentation of services provided to criminal organizations across the United States. These records included client names, services performed, payment amounts, and photographic evidence of the materials that had been processed in his facility. The documentation revealed that Thompson's evidence elimination services had been used in connection with over 40 criminal cases spanning 5 years. His clients included major drug trafficking organizations, professional assassination services, and white-collar criminals who needed to eliminate evidence of financial crimes. The sophistication of his record-keeping suggested that he maintained this information as insurance against his criminal clients, ensuring his own protection through mutual assured destruction. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery that Thompson had been expanding his operation beyond simple evidence elimination. Chemical analysis of materials found in his laboratory revealed that he had been developing new techniques for identity destruction, including methods for completely dissolving human remains while preserving dental records and DNA samples for his own protection. This evidence suggested that his services had been used not just to eliminate objects and documents, but potentially to conceal evidence of violent crimes against individuals. The investigation team found that Thompson's client base extended far beyond the regional criminal organizations that had initially been suspected. Encrypted communications revealed connections to international criminal networks, including organizations involved in human trafficking, large-scale fraud operations, and international money laundering schemes. His services had apparently become so valued that he was able to command premium prices from criminal organizations worldwide. Federal agents discovered that Thompson had been operating multiple facilities simultaneously, using the Maple Grove location as his primary operation while maintaining smaller facilities in 3 other states. The network of chemical processing locations was coordinated through secure communications and shared resources, creating a criminal enterprise that could serve clients across the entire United States without detection by law enforcement. The financial scope of Thompson's operation was staggering. Bank records and cryptocurrency accounts revealed that he had processed over $15 million in payments for his illegal services over the 5-year period of his operations. The money had been laundered through a complex network of shell companies, offshore accounts, and legitimate business investments that had successfully hidden the criminal proceeds from financial oversight agencies. Investigation of Thompson's personal computer systems revealed that he had been developing plans for further expansion of his criminal enterprise. Email communications and business documents showed preparations for establishing additional facilities in major metropolitan areas, with recruitment efforts targeting individuals with advanced chemistry and engineering backgrounds who could operate satellite locations under his supervision. The evidence recovery process revealed that Thompson had maintained samples of materials processed in his facility, apparently as additional insurance against his criminal clients. These samples, stored in a sophisticated preservation system, contained trace evidence from numerous criminal activities and could potentially provide crucial evidence for reopening cold cases that had been closed due to lack of physical evidence. Federal investigators realized that Thompson's arrest would have implications extending far beyond Minnesota. The criminal organizations that had relied on his services would now face renewed vulnerability to law enforcement investigation, as the evidence they believed had been permanently destroyed might still exist in the form of Thompson's insurance samples. The discovery of Thompson's client records triggered a nationwide effort to identify and apprehend individuals who had used his services. The FBI immediately began coordinating with law enforcement agencies across the country to reopen investigations that had been hampered by the lack of physical evidence. Now understanding that this evidence had been deliberately eliminated through Thompson's sophisticated chemical processes. As federal agents continued processing evidence from Thompson's facility, they uncovered additional storage areas containing materials that suggested his operation had been even more extensive than initially believed. Hidden chambers beneath the garage floor contained additional chemical processing equipment and storage systems that had been designed to remain undetected even during thorough searches. The investigation revealed that Thompson had been operating his criminal enterprise while maintaining the facade of a caring neighbor and successful businessman. His ability to compartmentalize his illegal activities while presenting a completely normal public persona demonstrated a level of psychological sophistication that made him particularly dangerous and effective as a criminal operator. Federal prosecutors began preparing what would become one of the most complex criminal cases in recent history, involving charges spanning multiple jurisdictions and covering crimes ranging from obstruction of justice to conspiracy in violent criminal enterprises. The evidence collected from Thompson's facility would ultimately support prosecutions of dozens of individuals who had believed their crimes were untraceable. As news of the raid spread throughout the neighborhood, residents of Oakwood Drive struggled to comprehend that the man they had trusted and respected had been operating a sophisticated criminal enterprise in their midst. The realization that Michelle Anderson's observations had uncovered one of the most significant criminal operations in Minnesota history left the community grappling with questions about how such extensive illegal activities could have remained hidden for so long. But the investigation was far from over, and federal agents knew that the evidence they had recovered would ultimately reveal criminal activities and cover-ups that extended far beyond what any of them had initially imagined possible. March 25, 2023, Federal Detention Center, Minneapolis. The interrogation of David Thompson began 4 days after his arrest, following extensive analysis of the evidence recovered from his sophisticated criminal operation. Federal prosecutors had assembled what they believed to be an overwhelming case against the man who had masqueraded as Robert Chen for 5 years. But Thompson's cooperation would prove to reveal criminal activities that exceeded even their most comprehensive estimates. Thompson's decision to cooperate with federal authorities came after his defense attorneys informed him that the evidence collected from his facility made conviction on multiple federal charges virtually certain. Facing the possibility of life imprisonment without parole, Thompson agreed to provide detailed information about his criminal network in exchange for consideration during sentencing. What he revealed would ultimately reshape the understanding of organized crime operations across the United States. The scope of Thompson's criminal enterprise became clear as federal investigators pieced together information from his cooperation and the evidence recovered from his facility. Over the course of his 5-year operation, Thompson had provided evidence elimination services to over 100 different criminal organizations, ranging from local drug dealers to international trafficking networks. His services had been instrumental in preventing successful prosecutions in hundreds of criminal cases across multiple jurisdictions. Thompson's background as a licensed chemical engineer had made him uniquely qualified to develop the sophisticated processes that made his criminal services so effective. His techniques for eliminating physical evidence were so advanced that they left virtually no trace that could be detected by standard forensic analysis. This capability had made him invaluable to criminal organizations that required complete elimination of evidence from their illegal activities. The financial investigation revealed that Thompson's criminal enterprise had generated over $25 million in revenue during his 5 years of operation. The money had been laundered through an intricate network of legitimate businesses, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency transactions that had successfully hidden the criminal proceeds from financial oversight agencies. His ability to maintain this complex financial structure while operating under a false identity demonstrated a level of sophistication that impressed even experienced federal investigators. Federal agents discovered that Thompson had been actively recruiting individuals with advanced chemistry and engineering backgrounds to expand his criminal enterprise into a nationwide network. His plans included establishing facilities in major metropolitan areas across the United States, creating a franchise-like operation that would provide evidence elimination services to criminal organizations on an unprecedented scale. The recruitment efforts had identified potential operators in 12 different states, suggesting that the criminal network could have expanded significantly if not for Michelle Anderson's observant reporting. The investigation revealed that Thompson's operation had evolved far beyond simple evidence elimination. Analysis of his laboratory equipment and chemical processes showed that he had developed techniques for completely altering the composition of materials, effectively transforming evidence into substances that bore no resemblance to their original form. This capability had allowed criminal organizations to eliminate not just physical evidence, but also to create false evidence that could mislead investigators and protect criminal activities. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Thompson had maintained detailed records of all materials processed through his facility, including photographic documentation and chemical analysis results. These records, which he had preserved as insurance against his criminal clients, contained evidence related to hundreds of unsolved crimes spanning multiple decades. The information provided a roadmap for law enforcement agencies to reopen cases that had been closed due to lack of evidence. Federal investigators realized that Thompson's cooperation was providing them with an unprecedented opportunity to dismantle criminal networks that had operated with impunity for years. The client information he provided included major figures in organized crime, high-level drug trafficking operations, and white-collar criminals who had believed their activities were untraceable. The scope of the potential prosecutions arising from Thompson's information would require coordination among law enforcement agencies across the entire United States. The investigation expanded to include Thompson's international connections, revealing that his services had been used by criminal organizations operating in multiple countries. Encrypted communications recovered from his facility showed coordination with similar operations in Europe and Asia, suggesting that evidence elimination had become a specialized criminal service provided on a global scale. This discovery prompted coordination with international law enforcement agencies to investigate similar operations in other countries. Thompson's cooperation revealed that his criminal activities had extended beyond evidence elimination to include the development of new techniques for identity alteration and document forgery. His chemical expertise had allowed him to create processes for completely altering official documents and identification materials, making it possible for criminals to assume new identities that could withstand sophisticated verification procedures. This capability had been particularly valuable to criminal organizations involved in international activities that required false identification. The federal investigation uncovered evidence that Thompson had been planning to retire from his criminal activities and relocate to a country without extradition treaties with the United States. His financial preparations for this retirement included the establishment of offshore accounts and investments that would have provided him with a comfortable lifestyle while remaining beyond the reach of American law enforcement. The timing of Michelle Anderson's observations had prevented Thompson from executing this escape plan. Federal prosecutors discovered that Thompson's criminal enterprise had connections to corrupt officials in multiple jurisdictions who had provided protection and information in exchange for financial compensation. These officials had helped Thompson avoid detection by law enforcement agencies and had provided advance warning of investigations that might have threatened his operation. The corruption network included individuals in local police departments, federal agencies, and judicial systems across multiple states. The investigation revealed that Thompson had been developing plans for expanding his criminal services to include the elimination of digital evidence and cyber forensics. His technical background had enabled him to understand the growing importance of electronic evidence in criminal investigations, and he had been preparing to offer services that would eliminate digital traces of criminal activities. This expansion would have made his criminal enterprise even more valuable to organizations involved in sophisticated white-collar crimes and cyber-criminal activities. As federal agents continued analyzing the evidence recovered from Thompson's operation, they realized that his cooperation was providing them with information about criminal activities that extended far beyond what they had initially imagined. The network of criminal organizations that had relied on his services represented some of the most dangerous and sophisticated criminal enterprises operating in the United States. The investigation had grown to involve over 100 federal agents and prosecutors working across multiple jurisdictions to pursue the criminal organizations identified through Thompson's cooperation. The scope of the potential prosecutions would ultimately make this one of the most significant organized crime investigations in American history, with implications that would extend for years as law enforcement agencies worked to dismantle the criminal networks that Thompson had served. But even as federal investigators celebrated the unprecedented intelligence that Thompson's cooperation was providing, they knew that the full extent of his criminal activities and their impact on the American justice system would not be fully understood until every piece of evidence had been analyzed and every criminal connection had been pursued to its conclusion. October 12, 2024, United States District Court, Minneapolis, 18 months after Michelle Anderson first noticed unusual activity in her neighbor's garage, David Thompson stood before federal judge Catherine Walsh to receive his sentence for operating one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in American history. The courtroom was packed with law enforcement officials, prosecutors, and family members of victims whose cases had been reopened based on evidence recovered from Thompson's operation. The prosecution phase of Thompson's case had resulted in guilty pleas to 47 federal charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and money laundering. His cooperation with federal authorities had led to the arrest and prosecution of over 200 individuals across 36 states, dismantling criminal networks that had operated for decades while believing their activities were untraceable. Judge Walsh's sentencing hearing included testimony from FBI agent Sarah Martinez about the unprecedented scope of Thompson's criminal enterprise and its impact on the American justice system. The evidence elimination services that Thompson had provided had prevented successful prosecutions in over 400 criminal cases, denying justice to countless victims and their families. The sophisticated nature of his operation had allowed dangerous criminals to continue their activities while believing they were protected from law enforcement investigation. The financial impact of Thompson's criminal activities was staggering in scope. Federal investigators had traced over $35 million in criminal proceeds through his money laundering network, representing one of the largest financial crimes ever prosecuted in the Federal District of Minnesota. The complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency transactions that Thompson had used to hide his criminal income had required the cooperation of financial investigators from multiple countries to fully unravel. Thompson's cooperation had provided federal authorities with evidence that led to the recovery of millions of dollars in assets that had been believed permanently lost to criminal activities. The detailed records he had maintained of materials processed through his facility allowed investigators to connect evidence to specific crimes, enabling the reopening of cases that had been closed for years due to lack of physical evidence. The international implications of Thompson's case had prompted cooperation between American law enforcement agencies and their counterparts in 15 countries where similar evidence elimination operations had been identified. The global nature of Thompson's criminal network had revealed that evidence elimination had become a specialized criminal service provided on an international scale, requiring coordinated law enforcement responses to effectively combat these sophisticated operations. Judge Walsh's sentencing decision reflected the unprecedented nature of Thompson's crimes and their impact on the criminal justice system. Thompson received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again be able to use his expertise to help criminals evade justice. The sentence also included restitution requirements totaling over $50 million, representing the estimated cost to society of the crimes that his services had helped to conceal. The investigation that began with Thompson's arrest had resulted in one of the most successful organized crime prosecutions in American history. Federal authorities had secured convictions against major figures in drug trafficking organizations, money laundering networks, and violent criminal enterprises that had operated with impunity for years. The dismantling of these criminal networks had significantly disrupted organized crime activities across multiple regions of the United States. Michelle Anderson, whose careful observations had initiated the investigation, received recognition from federal law enforcement agencies for her crucial role in exposing Thompson's criminal enterprise. Her decision to report suspicious activities to local police had ultimately led to the dismantling of a criminal network that had caused immeasurable harm to the American justice system. The FBI presented her with a Civilian Service Award, recognizing her contribution to one of the most significant criminal investigations in the agency's history. The community of Maple Grove struggled to comprehend how such extensive criminal activities had operated undetected in their peaceful suburban neighborhood for 5 years. The revelation that their trusted neighbor had been operating a sophisticated evidence elimination facility forced residents to reconsider their assumptions about safety and security in their community. The neighborhood association implemented new security measures and established closer cooperation with local law enforcement agencies to prevent similar situations in the future. The investigation had revealed significant gaps in regulatory oversight that had allowed Thompson to acquire and operate sophisticated chemical processing equipment without detection by authorities. Federal agencies implemented new monitoring systems for chemical purchases and equipment sales that could be used for evidence elimination purposes. These regulatory changes were designed to prevent similar criminal operations from establishing themselves under the guise of legitimate businesses. The legal precedents established by Thompson's prosecution provided federal prosecutors with new tools for pursuing similar cases in the future. The successful prosecution of evidence elimination services as racketeering activities opened new avenues for law enforcement agencies to pursue criminals who provided specialized services to organized crime networks. These precedents would prove valuable as federal authorities worked to combat the growing sophistication of criminal enterprises. The victims of crimes that had been concealed through Thompson's services finally received the justice that had been denied to them for years. Families who had endured decades without answers about their loved ones' disappearances were able to find closure as evidence preserved in Thompson's facility provided the information necessary to solve cold cases. The emotional impact of these resolutions was immeasurable for families who had never given up hope for justice. Federal investigators continued analyzing evidence recovered from Thompson's operation, with new discoveries still being made months after his arrest. The sophistication of his record-keeping system meant that investigators were still uncovering connections to criminal activities that had occurred years earlier. The ongoing analysis was expected to result in additional prosecutions as investigators worked through the vast amount of evidence that Thompson had preserved. The case had demonstrated the critical importance of community vigilance in identifying and reporting suspicious activities. Michelle Anderson's decision to document her observations and report them to authorities had prevented Thompson from executing his planned retirement and escape from the United States. Her actions had ensured that one of the most dangerous criminal facilitators in American history was brought to justice before he could expand his operation or disappear permanently. As the investigation concluded, federal authorities acknowledged that Thompson's case had fundamentally changed their understanding of how sophisticated criminal enterprises could operate while avoiding detection. The lessons learned from this investigation would influence law enforcement training and investigative techniques for years to come, helping to ensure that similar criminal operations would be identified and dismantled more quickly in the future. The quiet suburban street where Michelle Anderson had first noticed unusual activity in her neighbor's garage had returned to its peaceful routine. But the community would never forget that their vigilance and courage had played a crucial role in bringing one of America's most sophisticated criminals to justice. The case served as a powerful reminder that ordinary citizens have an important role to play in protecting their communities from criminal activities, no matter how well concealed those activities might appear to be.